Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. Dr. Chris Dost here. Welcome back to my channel, Biblical Languages and Literature. For some time I've been meaning to start a series in which I review biblical literature. In other words, just providing some videos in which I give you my thoughts about the stuff that I'm reading. And as I'm preparing to teach a new iteration of my Introduction to the Old Testament course, I thought this would be a great opportunity to start my Review of Biblical Literature series. And so what I'll be doing for the next few videos is reviewing John Goldingay's book, Introduction to the Old Testament, exploring text, approaches, and issues. Before we get started, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell to be notified when I publish additional videos. Click the like button. I'd really like to get 100 likes for this video to help the algorithm so that other people are notified about this channel. And if you would, please be sure to share this video on social media to help spread the word. All right, let's get started. Now, there are a lot of fantastic introductions to the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, and for those of you who are kind of new to this discussion, I will go back and forth between both terms. I prefer to call the Christian Bible's First Testament the Hebrew Bible because it is a neutral term. It's primarily written in Hebrew, a little bit of Aramaic in there, but principally it's written in Hebrew. And that is a religiously neutral term. And so since I find myself sometimes teaching Christians, sometimes teaching Jews, and certainly dialoguing with people of all different faith commitments and lack thereof, I prefer to use a neutral term, and so I go with Hebrew Bible. But seeing as how Goldingay's book is called Introduction to the Old Testament, and since it's written for a principally Christian audience, you will hear me using the term Old Testament far more frequently than I would in some of my other videos, which are aimed at a more diverse or broad audience. So if you look at the copyright page, you will see that this book was written in 2015, so it's about 10 years old at the time of the recording of this video. And it's published by InterVarsity Press Academic, IVP Academic, which is a Christian publishing house. The book is about 400 pages long, but it includes a number of web resources that are on John Goldingay's website, and he gives this information right in the introduction to the book. So you can check out and avail yourself of all of these resources at johngoldingay.com, and they are very helpful. All right, let's talk for a minute about the organization of the book. If you go to the table of contents, you will see that this book is arranged, even though it's a book written by a Christian for a principally Christian audience. This book, in its presentation of the contents of the Old Testament, does not follow a traditional Christian organization of the books. Instead, it follows the traditional Jewish approach. So how is the Christian canon arranged differently from the Jewish canon? Well, I thought we'd take a minute and look at that. So if we leave out the Apocrypha for a minute, which is something that we'll come back to later, typically Christians arrange the canon into 4 parts. And so it starts with the Law of Moses, or at least that's the traditional terminology or the nomenclature that's used. So the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible are known by Christians as the Law of Moses, and that would include Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And that, of course, is going to include some very familiar stories such as creation, the first humans, the flood, Noah and the ark, the Tower of Babel, the stories of Abraham and his descendants, the enslavement of the Hebrews in Egypt and their deliverance by Moses, and then the journeying through the wilderness, during which God leads Moses, who leads the Israelites, and God gives the 10 Commandments and the other laws to Moses and the Israelites for them to follow, and they serve as the foundation of the covenant with God. So that is, in brief, the first part of the Christian canon, the Law of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Now, in Christian tradition, the next part would be the historical books. And so we're going to have Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, and so on and so forth. The historical books will then be followed by the poetry books. And so books like Psalm, Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes will all appear in the poetical section. And then the Christian Old Testament closes out with the prophets. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, we have the Lamentations of Jeremiah, the book of Ezekiel, and then the 13 minor prophets: Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, etc. How is the Jewish canon then different from the Christian canon? The Christian canon has 4 parts, as we said: the law, the history, the poetry, and the prophets, or the prophetic. In the Jewish canon, there are only 3 parts. We would call it a tripartite canon, And so the first part is the Torah. In English, we tend to say Torah. And Torah is the Hebrew word that is often translated as law by Christians, but which really means instruction. But whatever you call it, the Torah, the law of Moses, the contents are the same, Genesis through Deuteronomy. So at least in this respect, the Jewish and Christian traditions agree with one another that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy open the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. Now, as I said before, the 6th book of the Old Testament is the book of Joshua. And Joshua, in the Christian tradition, is a historical book. It opens the historical section of the Old Testament. Now, in the Jewish Bible, Joshua is the next book, but it is not considered a historical book, which is kind of confusing to many because either a historical book is historical or it's not, right? Now, in Judaism, Joshua is looked at as a prophetic book. And this is going to be a discussion that we're going to have to come back to later about what we mean and don't mean by prophecy in the various religious traditions. But getting back to our point, Joshua opens the second part of the Hebrew or Jewish canon, but this section is known to Jews as the prophets, or in Hebrew, the Nevi'im. So what are the prophetic books according to Judaism? Well, there are 8 of them. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings are the first 4, and they are known as the former prophets. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, the former prophets. Now, if you were paying attention before, you'll notice that this is a little bit different from the Christian canon. The Christian canon's second part, the historical books, begins with Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. According to Judaism, it's Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. So a couple of observations. First is that Ruth is not considered a prophetic book, and therefore it does not follow Judges in the Hebrew or the Jewish canon. Secondly, while Greek tradition divides Samuel into 2 books and Kings into 2 books, in the Jewish tradition, there's just Samuel and Kings. It's all the same content, but it's just organized a little bit differently. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, the former prophets, and then there are 4 more prophetic books which are known as the latter prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. Now again, if you were paying attention, you'll note that there are some differences between the Jewish canon and the Christian canon here. So the first is that the book of Lamentations, the Lamentations of Jeremiah, is not considered a prophetic book in the Jewish tradition. Secondly, there are not 13 minor prophets in the Jewish tradition as there are in Christian tradition. There are only 12. And that is because the book of Daniel does not make it into the section known as the prophets. Now you might ask, wait a second, isn't Daniel presented as a prophet? Yeah, he is, but his book is not included among the prophets. Why? Well, you're going to have to wait till later for an answer. Now, the third and final section of the Jewish canon is known as the Ketuvim, or the writings. And writings is really a catch-all for everything that's not Torah or prophets. Now, we're going to have to get into these matters in greater detail later, but for now, I just wanted to give you that context so that you can understand why Goldingay organizes his book as he does. The first section of his textbook is an introduction, and so he's just going to discuss some of the fundamental matters, and we'll get into that in the next video. Part 2 is the Torah, the first major section of the Jewish Bible. Part 3 is the prophets, which is going to be the second major section of the Hebrew Bible. Part 4 will be the writings, the third and final section of the Hebrew Bible. And then part 5, the last section of Goldingay's book, is called Looking Back Over the Whole, essentially a review and summary. Now, I think the reader will really enjoy that the book has a number of indices. There's a name index, a subject index, and a scripture index. And so it's very easy to find material that you're looking for in this book. Well, I have a lot more to say about this book, but it's going to have to wait until the next video. If there's a work of scholarship that you would like me to review, I'd be happy to produce some videos on it. Just leave me a note in the comments section below and let me know the author and the title, and I'll try to get to that as soon as I can. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to be notified when I publish additional videos. And also click the like button. I'd like to see if we can get 100 likes on this video to help the algorithm so that other people are notified about this video in particular and about my channel in general. All right, we'll see you next time, everybody.